Good morning, Chicago. You're listening to Inspirational Perspective. I'm your host, Linal Harris, your very own life coach right here on WVON 1690 AM, the talk of Chicago. Inspirational Perspective on your radio is all about murdering mediocrity and living the best life possible. So as I ask you every Sunday morning, are you living the best life possible? And this is the place to be to explore that possibility. I want to kick this off with a question. And that question is, why is your historical identity important? And Bishop, I'll take you last. I want to hear from the other travelers because let's go to you, Daryl. I know this was your first time, man. Yes. And you and I, we had conversations while you were over there, and I know you did a lot of processing. Mm-hmm. And, for you, having experienced and learned the things that you experienced and learned, why is historical identity important to you in particular?
Wow. Let me start. Well, first I want to say thank you, Linal, for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. And thank you even more so for inviting me to Africa. I always wanted to go. But to answer your question, I've always been concerned. I've always been curious about where I'm from, just here locally. Like, quite often I would have conversations with my mom about why we migrate. Well, why my family migrated here to Chicago. I think she said they migrated here from Arkansas in 1953. So that's always been an interest of mine. Just that aspect. I never even thought about. I've always wanted to visit Africa, but I never even thought about that's really where I'm from, right? Mm-hmm. So then when you mentioned this in 2018, I was at your summit, and you mentioned about the DNA and everything, the African ancestry DNA, and I was like, wow, this is something I really want to do. So when I got my results back, I was excited. I had to text and call somebody, so I called you.
Yeah.
I was like, man, I'm from Burkina Faso.
Yes.
We
share that.
Really? Yeah.
Daryl and I, both of us from Burkina Faso. Wow. Our paternal lines from Burkina Faso.
Wonderful.
That's right.
Yes, from my paternal side. And my tribe or my people are the Bissa people, Bissa. And they specialize in peanut farming. I can't really tell you why that means a lot to me, but it does. It makes me emotional because you hear other people, other cultures talk about where they go back to their homeland.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, now I can say that. Yes. I have a passport now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can go back anytime I want. Yes. There's nothing that can stop me. Yeah. And I am going back.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And I want to go to Burkina Faso and just see the people that brought me here.
No doubt.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So I'm just excited. Hopefully I answered your question because sometimes I
that was a phenomenal answer.
But
go ahead. Yeah. But why is historical identity? Why does that matter to you? And what brought you to Ghana?
Historical identity is really important. I remember this time when I was in college, we had been given an assignment by the professor to write a paper as if we were write a letter to ourselves from our ancestors who migrated here. Mm-hmm. And as she was explaining the assignment, all the black people, we looked at each other like, does she not know? Wow. We did not migrate here, and we do not know what country we're from.
Yeah.
And it hit us really hard. And we went and had a conversation with the teacher, and her solution was to go ahead and just write it from whatever state you know that your ancestors came from. So we did our paper from Mississippi or Georgia, Virginia, or whatever.
Wow.
And to be honest, it was humiliating.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
So there is a collective amnesia that we have as African Americans, that we might not know that we have because we normalize the experience of being Black in America.
Yeah.
And it isn't until you go home and you feel the land, and it is a spiritual and emotional experience to reconnect with your ancestors. And if you haven't reconnected with your ancestors, you remain disconnected. And for me, going back to Ghana and doing this trip, it's something that I always wanted to do. People that I know who went to Africa, they always came back transformed. And I was like, what is happening over there in Africa? Why is everyone coming back so different? Like, they came back grounded. They came back with a new knowingness. And so I wanted to experience that for myself. So when I saw your email for a transformative tour, I was like, that's exactly what I want. Yeah. And who better to go with than Linal Harris?
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you. Well, and then I have to ask you, is that what you got? Is that what you got?
Oh, man, 100%.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
Going to the different places that we went to the slave dungeons, of course, but the transformative experience for me was the Slave River. And I just felt it. Like, I just stood in the water. I was just kind of stuck for a while. I think I probably stayed in the water the longest that day. I was just stuck. Dominique, you were there with me. It was just high impact. But what I felt afterwards was a joy from the ancestors that we now knew their story.
Yes.
We, their descendants, now knew what they went through. I felt a joy from them that we now knew that. I felt a joy that we, their descendants, their bloodline, were the answered prayers, like Sierra said, of our ancestors to finally return to Africa. I felt this great joy from them, and that's why we danced in the ocean that night. It was just great joy, and experiencing that, you notice that there was a hole or something unwhole about you until you reconnect with where you came from. I mean, think about the design. The divine design is that we have a bloodline that we come from for a reason. Yeah. We could have been Cabbage Patch Kids, no right? Doubt. But we came from a bloodline for a reason.
I love that. Thanks, Satin, for sharing that. And what brought you on the transformational tour of Ghana?
So when I think about the historical identity, part of reclaiming your identity with the tour is walking the walk and going there I needed to be there. Walking the same soil, going into the slave dungeons, and knowing that we come from the best of the best, and that we're strong, and we built the pyramids, and we were hunters, and it's just like knowing that and feeling that I needed to be there. I needed to walk that walk, and that was so important.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Hey, Q, what about you, man? I know you're on the live line there as well. What about you? This is your second time.
Yes.
Going. Yeah, what took you back twice, brother?
Well, the first time was, so amazing that I wanted to be able to, you ever watch the movie and it was good, and you're like, man, I must have missed some things, man. I'm like, I want to watch it the second time. It was very much that for me, and I knew there was so much that it was like coming with a cup that was, overfilling so much. I'm like, let me go home, drink this so I can come back and get my refill. And so that was why the return. But as far as to answer the question about historical identity, for me, it just answers a lot of the whys, man, that I've not been able to tackle in my lifetime. I think about just, family history. Like, I never knew any of my grandfathers. And it was a lot of my history I just didn't know, and a lot of that was due to the trauma of the transatlantic slave. that just trickle down generation after generation. But also, man, just I've always wanted to be in touch with my culture, something that I can call my own. You know, you have Cinco de Mayo, man. You see the Mexicans riding around with their flags, and they so proud of it. They so attached to it. And, you know, I can definitely relate to Sadden's story of just being, you know, I came up in a private school where I was the only black kid in my classroom. And, you know, I remember having a classmate from Romania who was very attached to his culture. You know, I had all of my classmates just knew where they were from. They knew my grandfather did this, and they came over, you know, this year, and the family set up, and they just knew all of that. And so there's always been a disconnect for me, and going back to Ghana and truly understanding where I'm from, it just answers so many whys.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thanks for that. Bishop, why does our historical identity matter? Especially when you have African Americans who say, I'm not African American, or they want to take the African piece off. I'm not African.
Sure.
They just want to identify as black. Why does this matter going back?
First of all, Linal, thank you for having us on this program, and thank you for the wisdom to have this program, right, to engage in it. And I am touched by the stories and the words of Dominique and Daryl and Satin and Quentin, primarily because I know the detrimental effects of not knowing where you come from, the psychological impact and the negative psychological impact of not being able to identify a place where you came from speaks to where we are. So when I talk to many older African Americans and I ask them about our state of being in America, they immediately go to the fact that, oh, well, look at these young people killing each other. Right. Oh, look at and what happens is there is an automatic complaint about ourselves because of our condition without going into the historical reasons why. Why do we do what we do? And it's called transgenerational epigenetics. In other words, the trauma that we've experienced as an oppressed people here for centuries is flown it's not flowing in our DNA, it's on top of our DNA. It's epigenetical, and it is a trauma. And every trauma that we experience, we're going to act on. That's the reason why so many Jews who survived the death camps, their grandchildren now have a high incidence of schizophrenia and depression because it's transgenerational epigenetics. So when you look at the fact that we have filled our children with psychotropic drugs, Ritalin, as a norm for many African American children, on top of the trauma for African American children that's experienced from generations prior to, then we begin to look at the fact that we're only 13% of the population of this country and don't have enough wisdom to ask the question why. If you've been here for hundreds of years, and Satin talked about the number of people in classes and classrooms who are able to identify and go back 100 years and go back to a land, and then all of a sudden you can't do that, but you're 13% of the population and you were here historically before they came? By hundreds of years? So then that means then that not only is there a diabolical plot to get rid of you, that's verifiable. You can read your books. The War Against the Weak is the best book to read if you want to look at the attack against your humanity in America. But look at the fact that you're the first to die if you have complications from diabetes, hypertension, or even COVID. Why are the strongest people who survived the death camps of slave dungeons, right, and being on your back for 3 to 6 months on a boat, why are we the ones now who are more susceptible to death? It's because we do not have access to a land. We do not have access to a history. Therefore, we're gutted as humanity, and we live as a dignity-less people who really don't know who we are.
Wow. Because one of the things you talked about early on was a healing. And I know one of the things that I experienced in Ghana for myself was a healing that I didn't even know I needed to receive. And so what comes to mind for me, Bishop, and I'd love to hear from everyone, so speak when moved, is many of us were wounded. I know before I went to Ghana, I was wounded and didn't realize I was wounded till I got over there, and that's why the tears flow.
Yes.
Right? Because there's a connection. You just don't walk into, everybody that walks into those dungeons, let's be clear, don't cry.
Correct.
Right? There are many go, ooh, this was horrible. I can't believe they did these people like that. Right? They can intellectualize it, all those different things. We see it, and it's like painful because there's a part of us, based on those epigenetics, that experience that, that we're not even aware of.
Yeah.
And there's a part of us that's being held back because of those wounds that we weren't even aware of.
Yes.
So for you all, as you think about the healing or even the pain, you can talk about the pain or because I think they go hand in hand, right? Whenever you're looking to take care of something or to take a wound that has festered and make sure it heals, you got to go through some pain first to get the pus out and and clean it up. And then, restitch it. And so there's pain.
Right.
And so for you all, what was that experience like in Ghana? Experiencing the pain and the healing at the same time. Because that's one of the things I love about Cape Coast is that it heals you as well. You experience the pain, but it heals you as well.
Yeah. Linal, I have to say that I'm so happy that we did it, the tour in the order that we did it. And I think you even said that at one point. We did those slave dungeons early.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was quite emotional, especially the second one for me. But then we went to probably the most beautiful place I've ever seen. And I have to say this. I think I mentioned this to you. The ignorance that I felt before going there, I didn't even realize that they had beaches in Africa. Didn't even realize it. And I'm realizing that people that I speak with now don't realize it.
You're not the only one. There's somebody listening right now that's going, they got beaches?
Man, I know. I talk to people almost every day, and I tell them about my experience, and they're like, beaches?
Yeah.
I'm like, man, it's the most beautiful beach I ever been on. And I stepped out of my hotel room onto that beautiful beach. So, I appreciate the order that we did everything. And so I was saying before we started the show, I mentioned to Bishop and Dominique that I'm still over there. Part of me is still over there. I kind of wanted to stay because the rest of me is going back at some point. And it was just transformational is an understatement. And I know we haven't gotten to this part of the show yet, but I have to say this. If anybody's listening and you're on the fence, get off the fence and go. Freddie said it last week. I think it was Freddie who said last week, go to Africa. Yeah. Man, go.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing. It really is. It will change you. I don't know how. I don't even know how it has changed me yet. I really don't know. I just know I've been changed. I think I have a little more pride in my people. Unfortunately, that we don't get to experience it, so we don't know until we get there. One thing I noticed that, and I'll end with this. I noticed that when we were over there in the hotel room, I would watch the news, and I noticed that they don't show our bloody mess, what happens over here in Chicago, all the killing and stuff. They don't show it.
No.
And so that's why the souls over there, in my opinion, the people are so nice and so friendly to you because they don't have that trauma that we deal with on a daily basis when you cut that boob tube on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Sat and Quentin, what would you all say in terms of like just the healing nature and healing experience that you had over in Ghana?
Yeah, I think that's the right word for it, healing, because going to the slave dungeons for me was traumatic. Being there, being where my ancestors were, just hearing the stories. But what's healing about it was the tour guides that were there. They had that same pain when they were telling these stories. And the way they kind of make it seem in America is they disconnect us from Africa and they disconnect us from Africans as if they don't really care about the transatlantic slave trade. Yeah. And so me buying into that propaganda, I thought that the Africans in the diaspora shared this alone, this trauma alone. But we don't. Every single tour guide that we had there, when they told the stories about what happened to our ancestors, their ancestors too, they had the same pain that we had, when they were the same passion that we had. And that in and of itself was healing to me, listening to the different tour guides. When we were in the slave dungeons, Elmina did hit me hard too. I agree with you, Daryl. Yeah. As a matter of fact, after we went to Cape Coast, I didn't know if I was going to be able to get off the bus and go to Elmina. And I'm glad that I did, to hear the stories that were there, because it's important to hear those stories. It's important to know, what we went through as a people to get here in America. It's important to know exactly where we come from. And going to the slave river, of course, all of that. But then there's the healing part, because you've now been reconnected. And so knowing those stories, walking where my ancestors walked, walking in that ocean of the transatlantic slave trade, in and of itself was healing for me. And I really just felt this connection to my ancestors that before that was more theoretical. Like, they would say, okay, we're going to pour a libation to our ancestors. And I'm like, okay. All right, we'll do it. It's an action. I have no idea. I have no connection to what that means. Yeah. And people would talk about ancestors, and there was nothing I could feel that connected me to that. And now that I've been connected to my ancestors, I was literally just talking about this yesterday too, a group of my friends. There's a shift in me from being angry in America about what happens here, about the racism that's perpetuated on our people, that has shifted to, the construct of race is that of superiority and inferiority. But the shift for me is beyond even that, and it's knowing our greatness. Yes. And so moving in greatness is where I'm at now, and I don't feel the need to teach people or explain ourselves anymore. I'm just moving in a different energy now, where I'm like, okay, I see what our responsibility is as Africans American. I feel like we have a incredible responsibility globally, looking at W.E.B. Du Bois, for example, who was the mentor to Kwame Nkrumah. So you have an African-American mentor to an African who graduated from an American university that freed the First Nation in Africa from colonialism. So there is a direct connection between African-Americans and Africans, not to mention the speeches that Kwame Nkrumah did that inspired Martin Luther King to be the activist that he was. So there's, when you respect and honor your mother, right? So in the ancient book it says honor thy mother and thy father. It's beyond just your parents. It includes respecting and honoring the motherland.
I like
right?
Yeah.
Respecting and honoring Mother Nature. There can be no peace.
Yeah.
And so I feel now that I'm a part of that shift, like a global shift now. And the way that I operated before was the goals were more centered around the legacy that I was going to create for my family. They're more individualistic, but now the goals that I have are communal. So it was very healing for me.
Yeah.
And it was a call to action.
So for you, what was this like, the healing aspects of this journey, Dominique?
when I think about it, when I went, something died in me in Ghana, but then something was birthed as well. And I used the analogy when I was thinking about talking to like friends and everything. It's like a different prescription now.
Yeah.
Some people wear glasses, so you think like, oh, I wear contacts. So I'm walking around beforehand, and I'm thinking I can see. Mm-hmm. And then when I go to the eye doctor and I get my prescription, I'm like, wait a minute, this is clearer. I can see now. So I have a new perception. I have a new prescription.
Yeah.
And it's a newfound pride and dignity. Like, you can't take that away. I know I mentioned before, we come from the best of the best. I belong here. My family built this. Like, you can't, I have a new, like, my head is held high. I'm not, like, you can't talk down to me anymore, or you can't take away certain things. Like, I won't give you that power. And I want to make sure I empower other people. So I became a new woman. Before I was great, but now I'm phenomenal.
Yeah,
I love that, and I want everybody else to have that experience as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. Why is our healing so important, and why is going to the motherland as a part of that healing so important?
Yeah, thank you for that. First of all, if there is no healing, then you have a nation with no black people. Period. The urgency for healing for me is the survival of African American people in this country, which is a prayer of our ancestors that not only would we survive, but we would also thrive when we returned.
Yeah.
There is no thriving for the African American until there is a psychological and emotional return to home. People who are gutted spiritually, emotionally, and otherwise cannot perpetuate and bring forth offspring that have enough dignity. I think I heard you mention that, right? Dignity and just a sense of self-worth if they don't have a place where they came from. So the healing, I think I've heard the majority of us this morning talk about when my feet hit that ground.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's the combination of the two. And when we hit the ground and we recognize that we do have an ancestral line, that's the beginning of the realization of my humanity is just not for me alone, but it is tribally connected to the whole, which is what America does. It takes your absence of information, it takes your ignorance, and then prospers on it, takes advantage of it. So then the tribalism that we have are gangs that are a white construct for the black existence. Takes our sons' lives away, and we can't do anything about it. We go back home. But when we come back here, now we're more prepared, and there is a resolve to be the powerful people that we were from the very beginning.
Man.
So for the first time, it was big, like we talked about the historical identity. I think the first time that was where I received healing. But on this second trip, man, my healing was spiritual. Since the 2018 trip, it's just a lot of things that I suffered natural loss in. And that was Yah almost in a way getting me prepared to come back so that I could hear a little bit better. And me and Bishop had a conversation at Coconut Grove that really just opened my eyes to some things. And since then, that has really attached me more to my spiritual power. And so definitely a lot of spiritual healing there. I suffered a lot of church trauma, and I've spoken this to a lot of folks growing up, to where I've never truly been able to find power there. And reason being is I was never really taught to seek my spiritual power for me. It's very ritualistic, but never really gotten the direct teaching on how to connect with God in a personal way. This trip really, really opened that door up for me. And since I've been back, the level of connection, the level of focus that I've had has just been tremendous. And I'm really excited to see where that goes.
The difference between head knowledge and heart knowledge.
and how I'm sure that many people who are watching saying, I know about that. I got my African ancestry, DNA. I'm good. I know where I'm from. I don't need to go over there, though. Right. I'm good because intellectually, I understand. I've read the books. I've seen the pictures. And I've listened to the show. I'm good. And not really understanding the difference between what you have up here intellectually and what you feel in your heart. What would you all say?
I think sometimes you don't know what you're missing until you kind of walk it. Mm-hmm. And the sense of belonging, freedom, safety, love, I never have experienced that in America. And you want that over and over and over again. And you can't tell anybody that. You can tell them the excitement and everything, but you got to experience that to be able to know. And that's the heart knowledge, the feeling, the oneness, the spirituality, just the connection. And yeah, that's so important.
Speaking of which, also, you can't get a jacket like that.
Oh, no, you can't.
Over here, right? Yeah. You're not going to find a jacket like that with that pattern.
Can I say something
please.
In reference to that? This whole notion of heart and mind, and that quote that I constantly bring up, that James Baldwin quote, to be born in a free land and not be born free is to be born into a lie. So we have to be careful, especially when we think we know something, because there's a good chance that the thing that we think we know is a lie that's been handed to us. Just like what we thought about Africans and what they thought about us. Right. We knew that they hated us, when in fact didn't know that the colonialism and the enslavement on the other side of the pond both did irreparable damage to the black mind. Right. And therefore we have the institution of the door of no return.
Right.
They had intended for us never to
never return.
That we were humans, that we were dignified, that we were builders and creators and innovators, only to be laborers for the white class worldwide. There's a lot of things that need to be unlearned.
I mean, man, and to unpack that is incredibly powerful. And that's one of the reasons you referred to it, Dominique. I call us the strongest of the strong. Because for those who were made captives before they ever made it to the dungeons, we lost 30 to 35%.
Absolutely.
Right? And then they made it to Anson Maso, the site of the slave river, in the last bath, and they were put into those dungeons. And in those dungeons, we lost another 30%. Yes. And then that's before we got to the ship.
That's right.
Before we got to the ship. And then when we got to the ship on that journey, on the Atlantic, we lost another 30 to 35%. And so those of us who are here, I mean, just think about that. Think about the power of that. Those of us who are here are the strongest of the strong, and we need to heal to fully realize that strength. When you think about the level of trauma we experience.
I think it's worth bringing up. They talk about colorism. And this notion of colorism, and is there colorism between the shades of Africans in Africa, or is that just an American thing? Bishop, you've been there so much, I'll let you take that one.
Sure. First of all, colorism is definitely a westernized construct that is created to separate people. Yep. The realities is that Brother Darrell, who has found out through his DNA that he comes from Burkina Faso. You would be, you would go there today, and there's a possibility if you lost your passport, you will not get out because everybody up in Burkina looks like you, right? Right. And so, I mean, everything, right, feature-wise. So you can't claim that American stuff. Right. The only thing is your dialect that would give you away.
Can I say something about that real quick? I did a little research on how many miles Ghana is from north to south. It's like a little over 385 miles, right? That's extraordinary. Yeah. I thought about the reason I did it because I was wondering, wow, how far do my people walk? Yeah. They weren't in buses or on horses. They walked. Yeah. Minimum 350 miles, 385 miles.
With chains on your ankles and your neck and your wrists.
And your wrists.
That's why I'm here.
Naked.
Absolutely.
By the way, naked and barefoot.
Yes.
Well, that's the only enslavement that is in the Bible that's recorded. That's why Isaiah chapter 19 specifically records the enslavement of African people, but he also predicts the psychological release of us as well. Right. So the biggest issue we have now is the psychological enslavement that we're suffering from. And I do believe that it's these journeys that allow for people to get freed up.
Yeah, I believe that as well. But the thing that really stuck out for me was where I had allowed myself to become victimized by certain things and ways of being in the United States. Mm-hmm. And when I was in those dungeons, I'm like, wait a second. So my ancestor survived this. My ancestor was chained, was standing in excrement, urine, sweat, tears, vomit, saliva that was up past his ankles. And even though he was victimized that way, he survived it. And here I am, my feelings are getting hurt, right? By little simple, small things. And for me, that was the transformational piece. Like, that's got to stop, right? That's, Linal, you can't let that stuff get in the way anymore. That's got to stop. And I remember, man, something shifted in 2018. And it's been shifted since. And every time I go back, I'm reminded, like, you don't let any of that victimization way of being kind of get on your back. You brush that off and keep moving. And I say that because Tony Robbins, I was at one of his conferences back in 2019, and he called it out. Him and Gary Vee both at that conference said, Americans are real good at being victimized, right? But then I think about our people and how often we step back and we say, they ain't doing that because I'm black, or they didn't do this because we're black. And even though we have all this volition, and I'm sure that's triggering someone right now, like, you don't understand my story, Linal, but even though we have all this volition meaning we're not chained, right? We're not being fed the scraps anymore, although we might feed ourselves the scraps unknowingly, right? We find ourselves victimized. And we continue to act as victims. In many ways, I believe because we learned how to be victims epigenetically, back to what you all experienced. Was there anything in particular that came up for you as a result of this journey that now you're like, moving forward, this will change?
I had a similar experience, and it's not so much that it's going to change. Before I went, I often would think about what my ancestors went through when I would have hard times. A hard time for me in my business is too cold outside. And so I'm like, well, maybe I don't want to go out and I detail vehicles, so maybe I don't want to go out and do that today because it's too cold. But then I would think about what my ancestors went through. Well, that's amplified now because I've seen it. Those tours are extraordinary. And I was in the dungeon. So now, like similar to what you were saying, Dominique, nothing can really stop me but bad health.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Anything I set my mind to doing, it's done.
Beautiful.
Period.
Beautiful.
Yep.
I love that.
That was a lot of shifts for me, to be honest. But one of the main shifts, I love how you set up the tour and had the journals for us to think about stuff. And one of the first questions that you asked is to write down all of your complaints on how your journey was here. And my journey, Bishop, we talked about that, was particularly difficult. There was a lot of resistance getting to Ghana. I didn't get my son's passport to the morning of the trip. And we didn't even know if it was coming. There was a storm that prevented us from getting into New York. And then the the travel agents going from New York to Accra were the worst that I've ever experienced in my whole entire life. And then you ask the question, okay, but what did your ancestors go through to get from Africa to America? And then you're like, you know what? I have no problems. Those are all first world problems. Yeah. Like, I rode in a plane, and it took a few hours. They fed me hot meals. I got to watch movies while I was there. I got, blankets and whatever. So your mind does shift from looking at what's wrong to looking at what you do have.
Yeah.
And walking in a spirit of gratitude. And we have so much to be grateful for. Mm-hmm. I mean, just what our ancestors did to get us to where we are right now fills me up with joy and gratitude. And so I think one of the big shifts for me is moving, like you said, the victimization, the anger that I had.
Yeah.
Because every time you turn on the TV here, they're showing you something that has happened to Black people. Right when I got back, they were showing a paraplegic that had been pulled out of
I saw that as well.
And so you're constantly seeing these messages about your people's victimization, but that might be by design. And Bishop, I know you can speak to that, but being in Africa, reconnecting to my ancestors, there's a quote by Maya Angelou who says, I come into the room as one, but I arrive as many. And I know that now. And so any room that I go to, anything that I do, I know that it's not just me. It's me and all my ancestors behind me. And so moving from victimization to living in joy and gratitude to living in purpose and greatness.
Yeah. I love that.
I talked about earlier about the glasses and so forth. So just my vision got broader and not complaining. I'm not saying I was a nitpicker, but I have not complained since I've been back. I asked my mom, I said, honestly, I really haven't. And then I asked my mom, what have changed? Have you seen a change? And she said, you know what? You're calmer. And if anybody know me, I'm like I'm a hustle and bustle going back and forth. I still have that element, but I have a sense of serenity that I have never felt ever in my life. And I think about this. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And my purpose shift now.
Yeah.
I went to the harvest. I went to Ghana and I saw it. And I'm like, I'm a laborer. Yes, send me, and I'm going to do. So
I love that. Does this ever get old? I mean, over 50 times to Ghana, many relationships in Ghana. But does going back home ever get old for you?
The only thing that gets old for me is America.
Wow.
What gets old is coming back to abject ignorance. What gets old for me is us constantly complaining about how much we're killing each other, but not willing to do the homework to find out why. And so that's the only thing that gets old with me. Every time I go to Ghana, it's a renewing experience, and it's a new experience.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I can only say that another thing that gets on my nerve too, and that is what gets old to me is the vestiges, the outgrowth, the aftermath of anthropomorphic religiosity. In other words, we have been given images of a God who is a color other than what we are, which is a construct that's been created over the past 500 years so that we begin to think that the object of our worship is indeed a person who has the same ethnocentric features of our captors. That has done irreparable damage to the Black church, the African American church in America. It does irreparable damage to our minds because we believe that God is anthropomorphic, that he is, you know what I'm saying, that I got to give him features and characteristics like mine so that then you will accept your place in inferiority, and I feel much more comfortable in my place of superiority. That gets old as well.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. What part of you has shifted completely as a result of having made either one of the journeys you made to Ghana?
I think the shift for me is in two places. The first one, and this goes back to what you were talking about, programming. I'm aware of the distractions now. And a lot of the reasons I believe that as Americans we have this victim way of thinking is because we're so distracted. And, you know, I talked to you about, we were there for 10 days. I don't know if we ever sat in front of a TV. I don't know that we ever got programmed with any commercials. There was nothing deterring us from what it is that we wanted to do except for resistance, which is going to come to it for anybody.
That's right.
So I'm aware of those distractions now. Like, you know, it's like I can see them coming a mile away. And so that was a huge shift for me.
That's big.
The second, I think the second shift, man, was just kind of being a little bit more self-aware of my being while there. And the food, for example. We saw no McDonald's. We traveled along that entire coast. No fast food. I think there was a Burger King maybe right outside of the airport and the KFC right there. But you get 2-3 miles from that airport, nothing. We ate good every day.
Very good.
You felt good every day. And it's something true to, you know, you are what you eat. And like that, I just noticed that. That was huge. So when I came back, I immediately started to make that shift. I'm like, you know what? I can control the way I feel about what I'm putting into my system. And, you know, I was talking to my boss. He's a vegan. And he said, you know what, Q? He was like, eat less, but eat more fruits and vegetables. He was like, that's what you need to do to get started. And so, like, I came back home with that. But, yeah, those, I think, are the two major shifts.
So let's talk about history, African history. Because one of the things that we intentionally do on this tour is there's not just an African-American history that is told, but we tell, and when I say African-American history, I mean the history of us from the time of captivity to the Americas. But we tell the whole history, right? The history of our ancestors who were Nubians and from Kemet, and who built the civilizations of Kemet. And introduced to us many of the sciences that even today we know as medicine, we know as mathematics, we know as, you know, the list goes on. So what did you all take from that aspect of the tour? And Bishop, I'd love for you to kind of clean us up and talk about why this history is so important. But what did you all take from that aspect of the tour, learning your history that way?
As a teacher, I can go first. So I've worked in education now for almost 15 years, and it's empowering. The very way that our history is introduced in schools today belittles our power. And so it is very important for our young people, really, man. Like, I mean, I just really wish there was a way to streamline this information directly to them, because the level of empowerment that is in that history is mind blowing. And you know, I think about just the young people that we saw while there. I don't know if y'all remember when they were throwing the little pieces of paper up over the wall when we were at the slave capsules. Young people.
Yeah.
And you know, I kept one of those pieces of paper because it hit me different. Not so much because, you know, what it was saying, but I was looking at the handwriting. And I'm talking these kids 8, 9 years old. I could take you back home to kids who have 3-4 times as much as what these children have, and their handwriting is 3 to 4 times worse. And so it just speaks to, like, man, the pedigree of academics and the intentionality that's going into it. And so that the history is rich, man, and it comes from an empowering place.
Yeah, right now they're having this conversation about whether or not there's institutional racism in society. So, of course, the perpetuators of racism, of course, say that there's no institutional racism. But when you learn your history in this way, you know that the institutional racism that remains is in the education system and in the justice or so-called justice system. So they're doing all in their power right now to fight the critical race theory that they want to introduce into school. And basically, it's just a correction of the history, the whitewash history that we have been taught that disempowers us. So speaking to what Q was just saying, the education that we've been taught is that all the mathematicians are white. All the scientists are white. The person who invented the light bulb and brought electricity to humanity was white. All lies. All lies. You go to the Vatican, and they have Egyptian statues, artifacts, everything. That's where they got their power from.
Yeah.
Look at the St. Peter's Basilica. What's in the middle of it? An Egyptian obelisk.
Yeah.
Why is there an Egyptian obelisk in the middle of Washington, D.C.? Why is there a pyramid on the back of the dollar?
Yeah. Or images of people that look like us all over Europe. Yeah.
Right.
Statues of people that look like us all over Europe.
Yeah. All over Europe and in Israel. When I went to Israel, the people who were herding sheep and walking with canes, like you would imagine, in the Bible, were all black people. And I was like, we never see black people in Israel. Like, if I hadn't come here to this land myself, we would have never known. And that speaks to the other institutional racism is the media.
Yeah.
Because they continue to give us these images. And you have to ask yourself at a certain point, why are they constantly trying to disempower us? Why do they not want critical race theory taught in school? Why are they trying to say that there's no such thing as racism or institutional racism now? Because they're trying to keep you disconnected from your history, your past, your power, so they can remain in power.
It's important for us to realize that that we live in a place that tries to minimize a lot of things about history, but it's been polarized by them.
Yeah.
In other words, well, why do you care that these are pictures, white Jesus? I mean, come on. I mean, it's just a white Jesus. I mean, it doesn't really mean anything, but it does.
But it does. Yeah.
So when we talk about Egypt, we are talking about how the Greeks were able to rename a thing so that they can control a thing. Whatever. I mean, we named our dogs, right? I mean, that means that I'm the owner because I'm the namer. I name it. Therefore, the naming of Egypt as opposed to commit, right? Naming a place that is in derision as opposed to a place of beginnings then allows for me to take ownership of all the things that come out of commit, right? So the obelisk and all of the other imagery that we find in our society is really just supremacy wagging its head at us and sticking its tongue out and saying, I took your stuff.
Yeah, and made it mine.
And made it mine.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what has happened to history. So history has been taken from us, and it's been made someone else's. Then, when we look at Hammurabi, who was the first, is African, but that's who created the building code for buildings over 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. Building codes go back thousands of years. But that came from Hammurabi, right?
Right.
Or you talk about Imhotep, or you talk about the fathers of mathematics, or we talk about Athanasius, who was a black man who put the 66 books of the Bible together at the Council of Nicaea in 325 A.D. I can go on and on and on. We should be embarrassed at the fact that in this modern technology that we have, that we don't know more about what we have produced, and then not have children who are saying that all that reading makes my head hurt. That is a construct that's been given to us.
But let me jump in, Bishop, because one of the things that I often say is we have to start to ask ourselves, why are we so entertained? So let me get on something real quick, right? So like the latest thing that everybody has watched is the Squid Games. And so my wife and I were talking about it the other night, and I'm like, what is the Squid Games? We watched the first, I can't even get through the first episode because, number one, right, this man is taking money from his mother. This is how it kicks off. The show kicks off with this. I can't identify with this guy, right? And from there on, I'm like, why would I spend I don't know how many episodes are part of the Squid Games, but for anybody who watched, I just want you to think about this. Why would I spend all those hours watching something like this when I have so much rich history on YouTube about Kemet? Yeah. So much rich history about our people and access to that. Why would I watch something like that for hours? I would only watch that if I have some symptoms. To me, that's a symptom of sickness. That I'm even entertained by something like that. It's a symptom of sickness. When you talk about it, Imhotep, who is the true father of medicine.
Of science and medicine.
Science and medicine that looks like me. Why wouldn't I be interested in that? That I can relate to. You know, this guy who's the star of Squid Games, like, I can't relate to stealing money from my mama to go play some, crazy game or gamble. So I'm saying all this because you talk about us having this access, but there's a reason why we haven't taken advantage of the access, and that is part of the sickness that we also talking about that needs healing.
And that's why we go back.
And that's why we go back. That is why we go back.
And for all of my physician friends out there, I know you believe that Asclepius is indeed the father of medicine, but Asclepius is nothing other than the Greco-Roman way of saying Imhotep.
Exactly. And let's go back to the reason why we don't call it Kemet. Because when you look up the etymology of the word based on how hieroglyphics were written, Kemet means land of the blacks. So you can't necessarily go around saying Kemet. You have to change the name to Egypt. So that way then you can also change the complexion of Egypt as well. So that way we don't necessarily understand and know who we are and how powerful we are. But here's the other piece, that mathematics is actually natural for anyone with dark skin. That science is actually natural for anyone with dark skin. That engineering is actually natural for anyone with dark skin, because our people, our ancestors were the creator of these sciences and these things. What about religious history? And we have you here, Bishop. I don't want to look past that, and I want to take advantage of that, because you can share with us who it is that you are and your religious designations and education, if you may.
Yeah. So right now I serve as the executive minister of Developed Leaders Ordered Ministry for a denomination called the Evangelical Covenant Church, which places me responsible for nearly 2,000 of our credentialed clergy and our 230 chaplains in Canada, the United States, as well as our villages in Alaska. I accepted my call into the ministry at the age of 9 on the west side of Chicago, and was supernaturally spared from the death and murder of the west side of Chicago. But as a student of life at the age of 9, began to start studying survival, being black and male on the street of west side of Chicago. So I saw God work in my life up close and personal, which made me then begin to investigate even deeper as to how I even came to know him, which is why I studied our ancient scripts and our ancient manuscripts that gave us the Bible. So by the time I was in high school, I was already engaged in the study of Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, just to make sure that I had a clear understanding of world theology, world mystics, who are great mystics of Julian of Norwich and other mystics. And so And so that's my own personal historical backdrop. I've been in this role now for the past 3 years. I've pastored in the south suburbs for about 25 years. And so now as I'm bringing this part of my life to a close, I'm looking forward to institutionalizing a process with Brother Linal as we begin to engage intentionally in these pilgrimages back to West Africa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I asked you to share that, Bishop, because one of the things that we talk about briefly is this notion of Christianity and the connection that many of us have to Christianity through slavery.
Sure.
And also my brother kind of talked about church trauma, but also the taste, the bad taste that Christianity has left, or so-called Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
right, quote unquote, so-called Christianity has left in the mouths of so many African Americans,
Sure.
Including myself. My brother talked about himself, and you and I, my first journey, had lots of conversation about religion.
Yes.
Because I'm like, all right, Bishop, you got the you got the so-called name and label.
Yeah.
Answer some questions,
Yes.
right? And that's kind of how I
love
came
it.
at you.
Yes, I love it.
But you helped me out tremendously, and I just wanted to use the last few minutes of this because I know there's so many of us that when you talk about anything to do with Christianity, or when you talk about anything to do with any religion that came from so-called oppression, we want nothing to do with it, and part of it is a misunderstanding of our history. So if you may, do you mind sharing a little bit of what we talk about in terms of religious history as well on this Sunday morning?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. If you look at the Limba tribe of Central Africa, back in the 1970s, a group of German and French geneticists had gotten wind of the fact that the Limba tribe, which is this dark-skinned tribe in Africa, claims to be the original people of the book, right, of the Torah, that they're Messianic Jews. And so they wanted to get the samples of their DNA, and they got it. Mm-hmm. And come to find out, making a long story short, they realized, these French and German geneticists realized that the purest Aaronic blood, see, they have the DNA of Aaron, Moses' brother.
Yeah.
So they know what Aaronic blood is. Mm-hmm. And a person who lives in Jerusalem, right, who you would identify as a Jew in the United States or whatever, has a concentration of 0.0-something% of Aaronic blood. These folks have the highest concentration of Aaronic blood of anyone on the face of the earth. So they are called Messianic Jews. So they wanted to know, why do you call yourself Messianic? Messianic means that you believe in the Messiah. Mm-hmm. And they said, yeah, we do. We know that the Messiah flowed from us. We do know that this Messiah lived among us. So this is a people who actually are living out what we call Christianity today. And technically, we're just people of the way, right? Mm-hmm. That's what Christianity used to be called, people of the way. The original people of the way, right, are those who then were Jews, who were Hebrews, who then had received the word of the Messiah. So they are living the purest form of Christianity that is known, and that which has been given to us is a bastardization of a faith and a religion that was built and designed as a sociological program to make sure that the money, the trillions and trillions of dollars that have been produced by our ancestors' hands, that we would never be able to tap into it, and that we would always work to keep promoting it. In other words, our job is to do nothing but enrich another caste of society, which is not the black caste. It's a white caste. We still live in a caste society. So the reason why, and good reason why, African Americans have a bad taste in their mouth about the church is because it's been ineffectual to produce what it says that it can produce. Peace be unto you. And yet you're living in a nightmare. Yeah. Why is that? Because you're dealing with and you're processing spiritual schizophrenia, where you ought to be at peace because you do have a worship of the Messiah, but you have no peace because the Messiah who you think you know is not the Messiah at all. And so the disappointment of the church is then constantly being around people who will stab you in the back, who really don't care about you, who are really into it for themselves, who just want the tithes and the offerings, who just want to worship one human being. All of these things begin to make the taste even more, we have a vitriolic, kind of a thing in us. When we look, it's bitter. Because we look at it, it doesn't look right. It doesn't look right because it's not right, because the genesis of it is not in the Messiah. The genesis of it is in social engineering to make an N-word. I almost said it. Because the making of that thing, right, has been the people creating their own image. And therefore, if I am that thing, who created me? It's the society that created me, made me the thing, and then built prisons and morgues for me. So I accept that. I accept the culpability and the responsibility of the church itself for creating something in the black community which looked like worship, but in fact, it was an empty, glossiolalic effort to try and get to God, when in fact, this God that we have been given is a God of supremacy, and the supremacy for another people. We have to reject that. We have to eschew that. When the scripture says true worshipers worship God in spirit and in truth, then that means that you have to worship him in spirit. That means that you've got to tap into who you are. And the only way you can do that is to have a Sankofa.
There you go. So to that extent, it all being spiritual, I know y'all looking like, woo! Take a breath. Take a breath. But to it being spiritual, I think that's a great way to close on just the spiritual awakening that you all experienced in Ghana. And I thank you, Bishop, for that. And for anyone who listened to you, who might kind of be on the edge of their seat or sitting back like, I don't know, because what you said, that's a lot if it's the first time. I've heard it many times, right? And I've had the chance to wrap my mind around it, but it's the first time. That's a lot for that person. I would say this, and please go ahead. Sure. Go ahead.
No, I just want to say that true church is when we are sitting around engaged. True church was when we were on the ocean front, at a long table, talking about family, talking about our challenges, talking about our triumphs, and in community with each other. And we trusted each other and didn't even know each other. That's church. That's all I'm saying. That the thing that has been given to us is theatrics that don't produce anything more than what we've already been experiencing.
Well, Joshua said himself that you shall know them by their fruit. And I think we forget that. And that's what I would say to the person struggling with this. Just take a step back and ask yourself, what fruit has been produced? And when you look at the fruit of the African American in the United States of America, it's a sick fruit. It's a broken fruit. It's a fruit that hasn't necessarily given back to us seeds that will help us prosper.
Correct.
And where we see or experience wholeness has been when we go home. And I know for me that's what it's been like, and that's why I'm so passionate about this tour. But what about the rest of you all? We got a few minutes left, just maybe 60 seconds in terms of your own spiritual awakening and what this experience was like for you.
Someone had sent me a Instagram meme, and it was of T'Challa in Wakanda, and it says that, the Black Panther taught us that we don't go to our answers for Jesus, we talk to our ancestors. And the person who sent to me was like, I thought about you when I saw this. And I would say that was the spiritual awakening for me, is like legit being connected with my ancestors and legit being able to hear and talk to them now.
And you know what I love about that, Satin? Knowing that I can still have a relationship with the Creator as I commune with my ancestors as well, because that's been demonized in many ways, right? To honor those who came before me, knowing that I can, it's a both and, not a either or. And thanks for that. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
I'll interject real quick. The scripture does say that we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses in the book of Hebrews, right?
Yeah.
There is a speech. It's not Old Testament, it's New Testament, where it's understood that we are in communion with our ancestors, and they are the ones who are cheering us on even to this day. It's in the New Testament. So
yeah, there we go.
Yes, I will go back to the scripture that I spoke before. The harvest is plentiful, but the labors are few. And I had a more spiritual awakening. Like, I owe my ancestors to succeed. What they went through, like, that was my promise to them. What I'm going to create now, who am I going to be? And that connection, I'm just on another level.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah, so I think, I kind of spoke to the spiritual portion. I think for me, and this is something, again, Bishop, that I had a conversation with you about, but I think my takeaway from the spiritual aspect is being a good shepherd. Bishop talked about David while we were down there, and how, shepherds were the first martial artists. They're the ones, they weren't pushovers. They defended the land, they defended the flock, they was able to deal with wildlife. But they also, they led their flock. And for me, I believe that what this means is I just have to take my work to a whole nother dynamic, and in many ways shepherd my people back home. And so, to whom much is given, much is required. And so I'm ready to get to work.
My ancestors, because I've always felt this way, and it's not so much that it's new. Maybe it was amplified a little bit. The fact that they went through so much tells me that I have to be great in everything that I do.
Yes.
When I started my business,
and what's your business? What's your business?
It's Made You Look Mobile Car Wash and Detailing. It's a mobile detailing business. I've been in business for 9 years. It'll be 10 years, May 19th. I started May 19th,
and where can people
2012. Find you? You can find me at madeyoulookmobile.net. That's the letter U, mobile.net. But I started my business intentionally. I get that word from you, Linal.
Yeah.
On May 19th of 2012, because that's Malcolm X's birthday. And he's an ancestor that I always looked up to. And when I am in my work in my business, or just living in general, just being the way I treat people, I try to think about the fact that my ancestors went through a lot, and it's my obligation to be upfront and, honest with people, and to lead with integrity. Sometimes I have to check myself and make sure, because I slip, especially with that integrity piece. Sometimes I slip, and so I have to remind myself. So this tour actually did help me to kind of tie that knot. I think about it. That's why I think I say that I'm still there a little bit. Part of me is still there. I wanted to stay there because I reach back in my daily routine. I reach back and I build from that. So
we are a magnificent, strong people.
Yes.
My purpose is to my community. One of the travelers said, Linal, if you did this in Ghana, you would just, you would blow up. You would be so big. You could make so much money. And I says, well, I love the Ghanaian people. I love all Africans. But I don't love anybody quite like I love my own community, my own tribe. And my purpose is to do this work right here in the States, stir you in the States. And if I happen to be in Ghana, stir you from Ghana. Right. But ultimately, for us to live our best lives possible and to get fully connected to the purpose that the Creator has for us, because it's our time. It's our time. The question is, will you be as powerful as you can be to support others, or will you be left behind?